My name's Alexi Trundle. I'm the Future Cities Coordinator at the Melbourne Sustainable Society Institute, who's co-hosting this event. I'm also a PhD student here at the Australian-German Climate and Energy College. And it's my absolute pleasure to introduce this event today as your MC. First of all, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of this land, the Wurundjeri people, and pay respect to their elders past, present, and emerging. I also acknowledge the elders of the Kulin Nation, as well as any other Indigenous people here today, both from Australia and overseas. I think this acknowledgement is particularly important today, given that this topic is about cities and climate change, cities being the epicenters of colonial dispossession for many Indigenous peoples across the world, and also climate change being something that's largely been driven by colonial powers that's disrupting a number of traditional sustainable methods of land, of livelihoods and land management practices. So our keynote today, I guess, if you will, is Dr. Cynthia Rosenzweig. I knew I'd mispronounce that, Rosenzweig, who leads the climate impact group at the NASA Goddard Institute for Space Studies, and she's based in New York City. She's the co-director of the Urban Climate Change Research Network and co-editor of the newly published Second Assessment Report on Climate Change in Cities, ARC 3.2, for those of you who aren't familiar with it. She was the co-chair of the Urban Thematic Group for the UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network and the campaign for an urban sustainability development goal, which is something that I'm particularly appreciative of working in that particular space. She was also named as one of Nature's 10 people who mattered most in 2012 by the journal Nature for her work preparing New York City for climate extremes. And I'd also add, I think she's probably one of the most enjoyable people to hear talk about this topic. She's got to be one of the most enthusiastic presenters that you'll find coming around. So thank you very much, Cynthia, and over to you. Cheers.
There we go, have to get fixed up. Great. Okay, thank you, Alexi, for that introduction. And thank you to Melbourne and the City of Melbourne and Melbourne colleagues for inviting me to come to visit with you today and share ideas and really share together ideas about pathways to urban transformations. Full disclosure, I'm in this neck of the woods because I'm going to an IPCC meeting in New Zealand next week. But whenever I'm in the neighborhood, I really like to come to Melbourne because of the colleagues that are here, and I see some of them have come to this seminar, and I thank you very much, such as Tom Roper. And also, full disclosure, my sister and brother-in-law live here. And my sister especially is an ardent environmentalist. And so I just arrived a couple of days ago, but I've already seen Fisherman's Bend and Westgate Park and some of the other great projects, but great and challenging projects that, that Melbourne is undertaking. So with that, let me find the clicker, and here we go. So let's see, I think we go like this. Is it gonna work? Tech people, I hope. Uh-oh, is it switched on? All right, here we go. So we all know that we have the Paris Agreement now from 2015. This is the actual language in the Paris Agreement that mentions cities agreeing to uphold and promote regional and international cooperation to mobilize stronger and more ambitious climate action by all parties. Who are the parties? The parties are the countries. They call themselves the parties. And you notice that they have a capital P. Then you go on and say, and non-party stakeholders, including, and then we have the whole list, and cities are here. What's striking about this word? No capital. So, you know, cities and city groups like ICLE, C40 have been trying for over a decade to work to get cities into the global agreements. And in Paris, they actually did. But what do we do now that we're at least, that cities are at least now in the actual language, even with the capital C? What do we need to do to actually change it from lowercase c to capital C? So what is so striking about cities, and why, for those of us here today who are interested in cities and who work in cities, why is it? That's a scholarly question. Well, why is it that cities are the right level of governance for climate change action? And first of all, we see that cities indeed are the first responders in both the main responses to climate change, both mitigation and adaptation. So on the mitigation side, you're probably aware of the groupings of cities that come together to give their pledges for reducing greenhouse gas emissions. The latest one that brings two massive groups together is the Global Covenant for Mayors for Climate and Energy. The largest coalition, this is over 7,000 cities, over 8% of the world's population. So it's growing. And you can see that also the commitments for the reduction in the greenhouse gases from the cities are growing as well. One just very quick point here, because I think it's so fascinating, that the countries, the parties, worked for 20 years to get an agreement, right? And they tried to do a cookie cutter approach. Remember all those Part Bs and, you know, the Annex 1s and the countries, et cetera, didn't work, completely failed. It wasn't until the countries adopted the cities approach to have each country do its own individual nationally determined commitment that they actually got the Paris Agreement. That approach is what the cities did all along. So one way that the cities actually have had a very important role, I believe, is providing that model for how the agreement could actually come together. But we also know that cities are the first responders in terms of adaptation as well. One of the things that UC Urban Climate Change Research Network, it's either called, it has two nickname acronyms, UCERN or UCCRN, does, is it makes the projections for cities all over the world. You see there's no nation states boundaries there on the map. We do, of course, nation states are very important for cities too. I won't go through all of them, but these are the projections of the climate risks that the cities will face. And it's actually very important. I'm going to talk about this more when I tell a little bit more about what we're doing in New York, is that the actual urban climate science with the downscale projections are absolutely needed to create resilient projects. It's how can any city spend money when it's like sort of vague, oh, climate change is going to hurt your city. We have to really bring the science to bear to really help the cities fulfill their potential as the leaders. So we're on the adaptation side, but it's really on the mitigation side as well. This concept of responding has now evolved into a current consideration of the concept of transformation. That this is what actually cities will have to do to actually fulfill their leadership potential. So what is transformation? So colleagues David Simon and Bill Selecki, for example, have said that transformations involve large, abrupt, and persistent changes in the structure and function of physical or social systems, and ecological, I would say also. And that really this transformation is absolutely necessary to fulfill this potential. So what does this actually mean? It means that mitigation and adaptation actually has to be integrated into virtually every decision, plan, and program, and the implementation of those in cities all around the world. Now, this all sounds rather grim, but that's why then I included this beautiful picture of this is Tan Ho City in Vietnam by Jeffrey Raven, and the green and the blue fingers designed to develop sustainability for that city. So that while on the one hand, transformation is scary and is a kind of, and maybe a contested term, but on the other hand, this potential for a transformation to a this sustainability, but in a positive sense, is really part of I believe, the definition of transformation. So this is one conceptual model of these responses. This is more on the adaptation side. This is again this is Bill Selecki, Mark Pelling, and Matthias Gershagen. So what this is doing is saying, what are the types, what are the states of adaptation? So there's collapse, right? So we're not adapted, a climate extreme comes along, a city, then there's collapse in one or more parts of the city. Then there's the resistance side, that's building the barriers, the seawalls and the barriers to actually resist the forces. Then there's the resilience, which was very much an operative term. It's very much an operative right now, that is able, so that a city is able to recover quickly and in even a better way, not necessarily back to where it was before, but even rebuilding in a better way. And then there is this new, more really integrative concept of transformation that we're really considering. What is the next stage? So just an interesting part about this is two points. One is time in this diagram is not left to right. So a city is not going from, doesn't necessarily have to follow on this pathway, right? It can go from, we can be trying to be resilient, right? But then maybe that coastal wetland, this happened actually in Hurricane Sandy, which I'm also going to talk about later. You know, at a certain point, that coastal wetland is filled with floodwater, and then there can be collapse, so you can jump. Or we can jump from resistance approaches to transformation approaches. So this is not a linear system. The other point here is, in terms of adaptation pathways, this seems to be a narrowing of approaches. And I actually want to redraw this. I'm going to tell Bill and colleagues that they should be widening these out, because these transformation approaches can be as numerous and as wide as our imaginations can actually, and our technology, our innovation can actually create. So one of the very, I believe, exciting things, and this is why I am in part optimistic, is that, for the most part optimistic, is that cities are already, I believe, beginning to be on the pathways to transformation. So of course I had to put Melbourne first. And you know, you're doing so many things. First, here's your, in the green is the overall goals of Melbourne that you're probably all familiar with, but then you're walking the talk with stormwater capture and reuse, for example, at Fitzroy Gardens. So Melbourne is definitely one of the leaders around the world. But we see it in all different geographies. Colombo, Sri Lanka, a very large urban restoration, recreation of a wetland there. Just a very, very exciting and wonderful project. Medellin, Colombia, also transforming. They're transforming in many ways, one of which is environmental and sustainable. This is has anybody ever been to Medellin? It's in this, yes, it's in this very deep valley with very steep mountains all around it. And they have created tramways that go up to lead to the informal settlements and the lower income settlements. So they've been working on their public transportation and access, and created this green belt. In some cases, this is 50 miles wide, almost 50 miles wide. I would think that this would really qualify also as transformation. And then there's many, many places in Europe, you know, who are really on this, and I think competing with each other about who's going to be, for example, the first carbon neutral capital in the world. But certainly Copenhagen really wants to take the lead there. I think Oslo is kind of, you know, catching up in some ways. But also Copenhagen has done amazing work on the resilience side with their cloudburst project and their water. This is a tennis court that is then allowed to flood when the floods come. So those are just some examples of that cities are already on this pathway. Now, I want to share a little bit about New York. And the point here is, this is now returning to the role of science. And what role do scientists play and researchers play, scholars play in helping cities to transform? Basically, what I believe very strongly is that every city has to have science in time and science in place. And that is really a big challenge for us as researchers. Because then when big events like Hurricane Sandy happen, this happened in October 2012, then the city is perhaps not able to withstand everything, but at least is on the road to withstand such events. So how is it that, how is climate change, and this is particularly on the adaptation side, organized in New York City? So these are this is the way it is. I'm sharing this because some of these elements, I think different cities, of course, do this differently, but these are some of the key elements that are needed for a city to actually take on these challenges. So the first one is leadership. At the time, Mayor Bloomberg, this was before Hurricane Sandy, Mayor Bloomberg said, we are going to create the sustainability plan for our city, and they realized they could not do a sustainability plan for New York without taking climate change, both on the mitigation and adaptation side. So he provided, and now Mayor de Blasio, our current mayor, is also providing strong leadership, absolutely essential. The second is that there needs to be some kind of coordinating body. There is so much going on with climate change. Like no one agency can actually do it. So there needs to be, I believe very strongly, a coordinating role. And in New York City, that's now it's called the Office of Recovery and Resilience. Then here's this is the implementation side. This is the actual managers of the critical infrastructure of the city. These are the city agencies, the regional authorities, private stakeholders as well. Not just the city, but bringing the private sector in. So all of our cell phone providers are there. They don't really talk to each other, but they're all there getting their climate risk information from the city. It's a very important role that the city plays. And they're organized into work groups, but at the same time, they meet as a group as well. We have to do that because of the interdependencies, right? We can't have all of these siloed. They have to, of course, they have to work in their work groups, but at the same time, they have to consider and work on preparing for the interdependencies as well. Then we have the climate scientists. I'm going to talk about this more in the following slides, but actually I should have started here because this is the community groups. This is the bottom up. So while we have to have the leadership and the coordination, we absolutely have to have the community groups as well. And this is something our current mayor, Mayor de Blasio, has brought into this picture. This picture, we showed this picture hundreds of times without the community groups. And then with the administration that we have now, bringing forward, and we had said, we had been advising, you must bring the community groups in, you must bring the community groups, but that wasn't really happening very much. But this time explicitly it is, so it's great to have that right down at the bottom. Absolutely, that has to be informing the whole thing. Here's the science part. It's called the New York City Panel on Climate Change. It provides the climate projections, but it provides more than that. It's not just, okay, here's the projections, that's a big part of it. But it's also like new thinking about the social issues, new thinking about, well, now we have to go to 2120, we have to go to 2200. It's like really being a think tank for the city government in this regard. And social science is just as important as the physical science, and we have biology. We also have, it's not just from universities, it's the legal and insurance experts. We had Swiss Re with us, Accenture, the big risk consultancies, and those risk management consultants. So that's the structure. These elements, I think, are what are needed as enabling conditions for all cities. But it's challenging, right? Because what do we do with small and medium-sized cities that don't kind of have this, mega capacity sort of ready to be spun up? So this is what the NPCC does. It provides regular climate risk information updates to the city of New York. This is very important. It's now done by law. And when we talk about enabling conditions, the legal framework for responding to climate change, I think is very important, because we all know administrations come and go, right? Climate change keeps barreling on. So we have to have these things in place that can continue so it's not just, oh, here's a new administration. Let's think about climate change again. Let's gather everybody up again. Let's do another report. Instead, what we have in New York is we have this series of benchmarking reports, which I think is one of the reasons why, there's, of course, nothing is perfect, but it is working. And so the latest one is the 2015, which is the latest climate projections. Here's another very important aspect, which I think is also very hard to do, is actually that it can't just, we talk about the cities, right? But when we talk about cities, what we really mean and what we really have to be doing is the metropolitan regions. Because otherwise we have the 5 boroughs, we're all ready. And then, outside, then there's 25 other counties in the, it's across 3 states. And then the other folks aren't ready. So this is in New Jersey and Bridgeport. The conditions are different. Than Sandy Hook, we have the highest. These are the sea level rise data from 1900. Sorry, this is hard to see. This is from basically 1900 to the present, and you can see that around the region, the sea level rise rates are different. So you also have to be adjusting, but at the same time have some kind of coordinated approach. Otherwise it gets to be like popcorn. Some people are preparing for one thing and other people are preparing for something else, which doesn't seem so good. So the projections that we do are for basically the 100-mile radius. So I'm just going to focus a little bit about sea level rise. So these were the projections that were done after Hurricane Sandy. Basically, the way I say it, this is not exactly how it happened, but basically the day after Hurricane Sandy, the mayor's office called us and said, help. How are we going to rebuild with that increasing risk due to climate change? And they actually, Mayor Bloomberg, the governor of New York State, and President Obama, for the first time, all said the words across that level of governance, increasing risks due to climate change. And that's why I sometimes call Hurricane Sandy the tipping point for not just New York, but I think also, for the US, certainly this at the subnational scales. So I won't go into the nitty gritty. Any climate scientists I'm happy to share after. But what you can see from this is, by the way, this is an infographic that we developed with the cities. So all of the information is co-generated with the people that are going to be using it. So this took a lot of time to create, because what it's showing is the uncertainty. So that's how we do it. We say in the 2020s, it's between this and this. I have the numbers, I think, on the next one. You can see the projection. But so you can see there's a lot of information here, but it's also very, very, I hope, clearly defined. So that was the 2015 projections. These are the actual, and they're in feet because our stakeholders use feet. This is the low, middle, and high estimate on the percentiles. But our scientists in our group, in our sea level rise group in the NPCC said now, because of the advancing ice melt in the Antarctic ice sheet, that we needed to adjust the high-end risk for the city projects. So here's something that, in terms of the cogeneration, it's actually hard for the city to, they got on board with this set of projections, and then we're saying to them, the scientists are saying to them, look, we really are considering this, and you really need to take on a higher level risk. You need to know this information. So we're doing it in a very deliberate way. We had, this is the literature. We had a expert elicitation in Washington, D.C., and there's another one that happened in Europe, to then create. And this is only, the high end overlaps with it because the melting doesn't get going and really have an effect on the sea level until the 2080s and 2100. But we are actually now changing the projections. So this is one of the things that it's so new, that it's not just, okay, here are the numbers, check, that's it, goodbye, right? That's why this interaction between the scientists and the folks who are actually making the decisions, we have to really be nurtured. How do we actually do that? Because the groups and the rewards of the groups are very different. So this is what the city has done with the projections. They have created climate resiliency design guidelines using those projections. And now this provides consistent methodology for engineers, architects, planners to design resilient facilities. They're all using the same guidelines. And this is not just for sea level rise, but it's for temperature, high precipitation outbursts, heavy outbursts of precipitation as well. And they even have this kind of mapper that shows it, that shows using the projections. I was at one meeting in which the audience was, and participants were a lot of these groups, members of these groups. And I have to tell you, they were thankful to the city for providing this, because they're going, they're designing new projects all the time. It's like, okay, what am I supposed to do? What am I supposed to use? What numbers, right? So this, I think, is a good way forward in terms of having a consistent set that can be used broadly across the city region. So I think this is the final slide for New York. So what's happening in terms of transformation in New York? So I think you would say this might be one of the more familiar bits of landscape in the world, downtown Manhattan. And I think you would say that if this actually occurs, this would be, I think, qualify as transformation. I don't know what they'd do with the bull. They'll have to move the bull from Wall Street. So there is very much an attempt, and with planned $20 billion of projects, about $9 billion have been spent or are getting going now, to actually take the climate change projections of the sea level rise and enhanced coastal flooding seriously. So just to give the report on this part hasn't started, but over here it has. So it's New York is, I think, on the road to transformation. Whether this exact thing will happen, but all over the city, not just in the very well-known neighborhoods, there are multiple resiliency projects going on. So now let's open up from each one of our individual cities to how do we create knowledge partnerships at local and global scales to actually do this underpinning, and so that this transformation can actually occur. So I want to share with you more about the Urban Climate Change Research Network, whose mission it is to provide the knowledge that enables cities, and here it's really, every time we say cities, remember metropolitan regions, to fulfill this leadership potential. So it's a lot of scientists all over the world, and it's in small, medium, and large cities. And it's now 10 years old. It was founded when C40 Summit came to New York. And what is the main thing that we do? We do lots of different things, and we enable the network members to work on projects. We link people up, all those networking functions. But we're all on lots of listservs, right? What really happens when networks work, I think, is when we work on something together. So what we founded was an assessment report process for cities, which is in some ways like the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, but in other ways not. So the first one came out in 2011, and the next one, and it's called ARC 3.2, Assessment Report on Climate Change in Cities, and this is the second one. This is the summary for policymakers, and I think there's some flyers around. It's just published by Cambridge University Press. We just released it at the CitiesIPCC conference 2 weeks ago in Edmonton. So this is the part that is, so the report itself, this report is 800 pages. This is the summary for policymakers, which we worked on with a communication specialist who said, scientists, you can't keep saying these things that nobody understands. So we really tried here to make all the work done understandable. And I just want to highlight my co-editors, Bill Selecki, Patricia Romero-Lancal. Maybe some of you know these. She was at NCAR for a long time. Shogun Morotra was at the New School, now is at World Bank. Shobhakar Dakal is at the Institute for Technology in Thailand. And Samaya Ali Ibrahim is with us here. It was with me in New York. So this is the framework. Here's the main body of the report, and here's we did all these focus groups about, it wasn't just this is what we think you should know. It was, okay, what city leaders and city folks, what do you need to know? So there's the climate science, disasters and risk. I won't read all of these, but it's across all of these things: urban planning and design, economics, finance, private sector. There are 16 chapters to provide at least a contribution to the base of knowledge for cities to take this on board. All the traditional sectors, energy, housing, and informal settlements, transportation. Barry is here working on that, I know. Water system, solid waste. And then, of course, governance. How does governance have to change so that this can actually happen in cities all around the world? Oops, wait a minute. Just want to say there's case study docking station. I showed you summary for city leaders, which was released at COP21 in Paris. And now I'm going to talk about the case study docking station. Because one of the things from the city networks is people, and we all know this too, people like to hear from their peers. They don't like to have scientists scolding them all the time and telling them this is what it is, right? You have that. So so part of what ARC 3.2 is a case study docking station. It's a searchable database on the web, so that and they are written by folks working in cities, sometimes researchers, sometimes implementers, all different. And this is what they are divided. And you can see there's small, medium, and large. This is small, medium, and large. The red are the largest cities. So we pulled out the Australia case studies. And I'm not sure if Xiaoming Wang is here, but he was absolutely fantastic on the disaster. And maybe some of the case study authors are here, but these were the ones that were from Australia. So thank you very much to everyone who worked on these and submitted these. And Xiaoming was also the co-CLA for the disasters and risk chapter. So when we released the ARC 3, at a media event, a press conference 2 weeks ago in Edmonton, there was a reporter standing in the back of the room. And he said, I was explaining all this on and on. He said, what's the message? Right? Okay, so now I'm going to share with you what the message is from the 800 pages throughout the chapters, coming together with the authors and the reviewers, et cetera, what really emerged. And what emerged was 5 pathways to transformation. And this wasn't something that we were thinking about. We hadn't planned this. This is what actually emerged from the document. So I'm going to give you a very quick overview of what those 5 are. The first one is that, and this is for how cities, urban areas can transform, what they need to do. So the first one is that we need to do a lot better on bringing mitigation and adaptation together in some way. Now, finding the win-win of these. Now we know this is not always the case. There are trade-offs. If you turn on the air conditioner, you may be helping on adaptation, but you are not helping on mitigation. So we have to really, I think, do just lots more to find the integration of mitigation and mitigation and adaptation in cities, because cities, everything is really so intertwined. So this is high priority in urban planning, urban design, and urban architecture. And the example is a smart city in Helsinki. You can see right next to the Baltic Sea. So all of this had to take sea level rise into account as they were creating their green neighborhood. The second one has to do with disasters. This timescale issue that there was, again, it was bifurcation. See, all these bifurcate before there's and it still is a lot of mitigation one place, a lot of adaptation another place. Here is there's the community who does disaster risk reduction, the community that does climate adaptation. These have to be brought together in cities because these are the cornerstones, but they inform each other. Because that frequency and intensity of the extreme events are increasing. And that's coming from the long-term understanding. And then the long-term understanding has been way over-focused on the mean of all these changes, and the extreme events have to be taken into account. So this is Staten Island after Hurricane Sandy. The third one is about co-generating risk information. I've mentioned all of these previously in the talk. So everything has to be done with the community. And I think in Melbourne, that's, I think you all do a very good job on this. Janet Belithos said that she was going to a meeting yesterday about one of the new projects, a community meeting we have to have the voices of everyone in the room. So this has to be together, and the scientists have to be in the room too. So stakeholders, scientists working together. Now, why is this? Again, this is not just because, oh, it's nice if we all get together, right? It's not. It's because of this. This is the way that we can actually enhance the relevance and the legitimacy of those interventions, those implementations, those strategies. If we don't do this, they're not going to be as effective. That's why. So the fourth one is about the disadvantaged populations. All cities have groups, people who are more vulnerable than others. And any city that is addressing climate change has to take the needs of those people into account, front and center. They just absolutely have to. Otherwise, and the reason is, this is how human well-being, social capital, sustainable social and economic development. This is one of the main ones, which is the link to the SDGs. Although they all are, but this one especially. The final one is, I call this nuts, bolts, and networks. The first one is we have to advance city credit worthiness. We have to do all the finance stuff. We have to pay for this. How are we going to pay for this? We need much better models. And there's a wonderful group, Resilience Brokers, that's getting on, trying to get big capital to actually invest in these projects and get their money back. That's the kind of, we need that kind of funding model. We need improved governance, many places in the world, transparency, effectiveness of the institutions. How do we actually implement projects? Many cities have a cycle of funding friends, I would say. So we have to see really how can we all work together to improve city governance? And then the final one on the pathway is that this networking function of the city. So no city has to go it alone, basically. So these networks, ICLE, C40, UCLG, so that they are on the city network side, they're on the doer side, and then the Urban Climate Change Research Network is on the knowledge network side. So it's I think we're all experiencing this network of networks world that we live in. And that's really how we have to work together to make this happen. So this is my final topic, which is about, so we did all this, as we were doing all this, creating ARC 3.2. And we said, well, if we just publish this book, Cambridge University Press, and people, well, first of all, anybody who teaches anything about this stuff, please use it. It's basically your whole class on climate change in cities. But it's got to get, how do we get it to the people who need the information, this knowledge base? Also, because not every city can have a New York City, have a panel on climate change the way New York has. So we have, with UCERN, we have regional hubs. And you can see this is the kind of thing that they do. So it's actually, so it's a two-way street up to the global network, and that we are disseminating, but also seeing what's needed, translating into the local languages. All this real network linking function actually has, that we came up with this idea of hubs, and it's, I have to say, working. It's very exciting. So at the conference 2 weeks ago, our the hubs were there, the directors were there, they were organizing sessions, they were giving talks, and it just is really this great building of two-way streets. So just to, there's a few of them, I won't go through all of them, but the first one was Europe and Paris. We also have nodes, which can be kind of smaller ones. So there's a high latitude city hub. There's Durban, South Africa, Rio de Janeiro in North America, Philadelphia, Shanghai, and we just are starting, and this is what I really want to talk to you about, is Australia and Oceania. So this is the leads are Ken Doust, whom you may know, Kate Auty, whom you may know, Barbara Norman. It's just really getting going, and we're in this we're really now in this part, which is discussing the best way to operationalize it. So any ideas for that? Anybody who wants to come and be part of it? UCERN is a completely horizontal network, and there is so much to do. There's room for everybody. So with that, final result that came, final finding, the final part of the findings on the pathways to urban transformation was that the cities, it wasn't enough to just do one of these. It's like it's not a pick and choose thing. It's not a menu. Really and truly, for all of us to work together with all the cities, so the knowledge networks to work together with the city networks, with the cities themselves, is to take on and pay attention and bring on board all of the fives that I just went through. You sort of can't leave one out. It's not, we're not going to get that scale of transformation that's actually needed. So with that, I think the next one is the websites. Thank you very much. Great. So over to you, Alexei.
Cynthia. So we've got about 15 minutes left for questions. There's a little bit of space here at the front, by the way, if any of you guys are getting a little bit tired of standing on your feet there. I'm just going to mention as well that this session is actually being live streamed at the moment as well. So we might try and take a couple of online questions in there as well, but just so you're aware that this is being streamed on the web as we speak. Are there any particular questions? If you could please introduce yourself and the organization that you come from. If we could keep the questions brief, that would be great. And I will cut you off if it becomes more of a comment than a question. So does anyone want to kick off? Yeah, I think you were just beaten there, Alan. Sorry. There's a microphone coming to you as well, if you could just wait 10 seconds.
Thank you. Brindella from Energy Makeovers. I'm interested in, so a lot of value is being destroyed in property. So for example, in Manhattan, how is that being managed?
Should we take a few? And
yeah,
why don't we take a few and then?
Alan Pears, I'm associated with the college and also RMIT and the Alliance for Energy Productivity, etc. Right back at the start was the issue I was interested in, which is I've been involved with a group called the Voluntary Carbon Markets Association, and we have been spectacularly unsuccessful at driving recognition of the need for additionality under carbon accounting for subnational groups down as low as communities. So I was very conscious when the mayors were all speaking, none of them actually talked about this. And yet, if you can't get the national governments who are responsible, you can't actually claim that you're achieving anything other than making conservative governments achieve weak targets more easily.
Mm-hmm.
That's a very pessimistic way of framing it, but that's
Great, good. And there was one.
And Chris, I think we're back there. It's the next hand up.
Chris Ryan, this University of Melbourne. Cynthia, thank you. I'm just thinking that any projects or policies that are in Australia that are very similar and fit into the framework that you've presented would, I think, all include one thing that's missing in terms of infrastructure, important priority infrastructures, and that's food. So you have energy, water, transport, waste. And most Australian ones would include food, and I'm wondering whether that's something unique about Australia or whether it's only something that is in the way that of the slides that you presented.
Great. All right, let me take a stab to, oh, I have a mic. That's great. Okay, the property values. This is, you see, it's not all easy. You know, it's, what about the developers who have invested in land by the coast? That is then going to, let's, you know, go back to that climate U, right? This is probably some of the most, let's see if we can get back to it. Some of the most expensive real estate in the world, probably. Where are you? You should be coming up. So what New York is doing is to create its own council of the developers. And as always, that goes to there's some early adopters. So one of real estate in New York is run by mainly 5 families. Sounds kind of familiar to some other things you may have heard. And there's a spectrum of adoption of the challenge of the issue. So one of the groups interacts with us on a one-to-one basis. And they have already, in their development and their properties, instituted the kind of thing that the city, remember those design guidelines, they've taken our projections, the NPCC projections on board and already done early adoption. But there is still, I think, a long way to go to get that group, which is absolutely essential in a city to do. On the opposite spectrum, so I would say there's a start in New York, not at all full. On the opposite spectrum end of the spectrum, I've heard that in San Francisco, the developers banded together and sued the group that was creating the projections. So, you know, this is so I'm very glad you raised it. This is something we have to. It's very challenging. The second one is on the carbon markets. So, Mike, here's a question back to you, which is maybe the city is not the right level, because in the States, in the US, it's the states that are doing it with the RGGI, the regional, it's a Northeast carbon program. It's a cap and trade program, but it's sort of on the way to carbon market. And then there's one that California is also doing. So, you know, you can see that one of the very interesting thing is what is the right level of governance for these different interventions? And is the city, I would pose that as a question. Can the city or the group of cities actually, is that the right level? Would it be practical, efficient to actually try to create the market within that? They are doing things like, you know, banding together for procurement with on the consumption side. So, you know, there's sort of, I would say, a little bit of prototype, but you're right, I haven't heard that. And that's, I think, crucially important, as is food. So when we got together with the authors, as the author group was forming, we tried to form a chapter on food, on urban food, and we couldn't find the critical mass. But that was like 5 years or so years ago. Since that time, there's been so much work on it, and I very much hope that in ARC 3.3 we would have that. We were talking on the tram this morning coming here. We were talking about how, you know, for countries that are very strongly agricultural, it's a very important industry. It's absolutely crucial. So I think that's why, so Ireland, New Zealand, these kinds, there's specific focus on creating an agricultural sector that is as sustainable and as low greenhouse gas emissions as possible. But then the city part is the demand for the food, the potential for changing diets, which can have a very big effect on the mitigation side. So we tried. We have there's quite a long and extended box, but we need to do more. Over to you.
Great. So we've got 2 questions online. Was there one from the floor that we could throw into the mix as well? Kathy, I think.
And then let's take the online ones. That's fun too. Great.
Do we want to hit the online ones first?
Up to you, if you like.
Hi, Cynthia. Kathy Oak.
Hi, Kathy.
So I'm a councillor at the City of Melbourne. I'm also a city researcher. I'm very interested in how you bring the city researchers together with the city decision makers. So I'd be interested in your thoughts. I've got a lot, but I'd be interested in your thoughts on how to better knowledge broke between politicians and researchers.
Yep.
Thanks, Kathy. And I'm just going to pass to Zebedee for the 2 online questions.
Yeah, so we got one from Robert McLean, who asks, what's the best way to introduce this topic to my regional Victorian city, which is Shepparton? And Gary O'Leary has asked, given the reduction in climate science research funding in Australia, how should the science be funded in this hub model?
Great. Okay. First, on the knowledge broking side. So at this conference in Edmonton, and Kate was there, there was a whole session on this, and Luca Leonardson, who is the chief for climate change adaptation from Copenhagen, was on the city side, and I was on the science side, and we had and then we had a global network side, Amanda Eichel from Global Covenant of Mayors. And we had a very, very interesting and challenging discussion. What my colleague Bill Selecki says is, we have to accept that there is creative tension between the groups. The city representative was saying things like, we have to make decisions quickly. We can't wait for researchers to take 2 years to do a study and get it peer reviewed. We have to put up with imperfect knowledge, which is like a horror it's just like absolute horrifying to scientists. But at the same time, the city recognizes that this kind of science foundation is essential for the long-term decision-making effectiveness. On my side, I was saying things like, the reward systems are totally different. So you see, we have the researchers here in the room, peer-reviewed journal articles. That's what we get. That's how we get our advancement in our career, compared to the city folks who are, a successful implementation of a program. Funding models, extremely difficult, and that leads to Gary's as well, which is that. Cities really are not set up to fund research. National science foundations at the national level. It's a federal level that actually funds research. But then we had a great discussion about how we've got to come up with some new models. So some of those were like a pro bono thing for the scientists to work with cities and have their, if they're funded by agencies or NSF, or maybe cities banding together and putting in a pool for a small amount that then can fund some regional research. Also, for the big projects, the GEF projects, the Global Climate Funds projects, the Global Environmental Facility projects, those projects put millions and millions of dollars into the implementation projects. This is in particular in developing countries. And I believe that we should all lobby and work towards one little fingernail of a percentage for research. Because otherwise, how are we going to learn from those projects? We could be pouring money into sand if we don't really figure out those things. On the regional part, that's what I'm hoping. Thanks for the online question. That's what I'm hoping the hub will be able to do. That's what we're hoping, not just me. That you see, this hub idea is that then the big cities like Melbourne could be reaching out to those cities at the regional scale and really helping and providing them with that city, the beginning, this enabling conditions for each city, for all the cities, and small, medium, and large. So a global network, I don't think can go down to that level. But by doing this kind of tiered approach, I think we're going to be able to do it. And Gary, hi, he's a colleague more on the food side, actually. As I think I've spoken to the funding, we've got to find new models.
We've got time for a couple more quick questions. And there's also one more online. Any takers from the room? Yeah.
Kate.
So Kate, fantastic.
I couldn't help myself. Thanks for a great presentation. I'm Kate Noble from the City of Melbourne, and I'm looking after our zero net emissions strategies. It's all very topical. At the conference over in Edmonton, one take-home message for me that I thought was just so valuable was this: how do we get better at that interaction between the reward system for academic researchers and city practitioners? And it was apparent to me that a lot of the conversations that peer-to-peer cities have would be tremendously interesting for academic researchers. Mm-hmm. And because city practitioners are so busy implementing our programs, we could get better at reaching out and making that available. So I, for example, I had a great conversation with the City of Cape Town on their water shortage problems and our millennial drought here. I wonder, as well as the international city networks, what other examples are there
Sure.
where we can, as city practitioners, make our work more available, visible in a practical way for city research?
Great, good. Yeah.
We've just got one more online.
All right.
So I'll just throw that in there as well.
I'm going to apologise in advance if I get this name mispronounced. I believe it's Sasha Suspek, who has asked, what role does cost-benefit analysis play in adaptation and mitigation? In particular, are there examples of common or state-of-the-art approaches that might serve as a template for assessing and planning implementation projects?
Great question also. So, okay, first, yeah, there was at this session there was a range of ideas. So one is the knowledge networks and the hub and network approach. Another was embedded scientists. And this would get to, I think, what Kate, you were suggesting is that a scientist from the uni could be embedded with the city governments. Maybe you've already done it. And then maybe they could do the project of how that peer-to-peer learning was working for Melbourne. Something like that. An evaluation of, well, how is it? I think, look, C40, ICLE, wonderful organizations. How is it really working for the cities who are part of them? And having an embedded scientist right there, that's one of the possible projects. But it can also be something on a particular project that you are doing that you would like to have more in-depth research on as you are developing it. Do you have a quick follow-up, Kathy? Yes. Oh, fantastic. All right, great.
And we also have Lars Cohen sitting just behind Kathy, who's the chair of resilience at the City of Melbourne, based at the University of Melbourne. So it's great that you've come to the same conclusion.
Yes, good. All right, so that was definitely brought up. On the next one was from the web, cost benefit, yeah, CBA. All right, so first of all, on the one hand, we need a lot more cost-benefit analysis because in the end of the day, cities have finances, they have budgets, and still financing is the bottom line. So I think as researchers, we've really fallen down and not done enough cost benefit analysis, just like plain old cost benefit analysis. Does this work? And you know, how much money will we save if we go this route, or how much money will we spend? Now, long ago, I tried to, I have a joint appointment at Columbia University, and I tried to get an economist colleague there. Apologies to any economists in the room, but I said, this is the kind of just nuts and bolts thing that we need. He said, sorry, I won't get tenure if I do this project, if I do this type of project. You see, it's too simple. So it's almost like we need a kind of a cadre or cohort of people who will do the cost benefit analysis that's needed. So now, one more thing about cost benefit is that it has to be, and there is now, you know, it's evolved, and it has to take non-monetary. So it's very good on the so we need the monetary part, because that's still like such a prime mover for cities to actually act. But then it's not taking, how do you quantify the non-monetary benefits of sustainability, basically, but of climate action? And so there are now newer techniques, you know, more complicated, more nuanced, and we need all of that as well, because the social science, and that's, I know what Alexei's working on, the social science aspects also have to be part of it. But we still need a lot of nuts and bolts. Just how much will this stuff cost? How much money are we saving if we put up the seawall, if we rebuild that wetland that is going to deal with the enhanced coastal flooding, like on Staten Island? You know, we have, it's called the Staten Island Blue Belt project. You know, how much money are we have we actually saved? Because that's, and I think we still have, I think we need to really roll up our sleeves and help on that as well.
Well, we might have to leave it on that very big question.
Can I just say one more thing?
Yes, please.
Which is, I flashed this up because I wanted to give one report this is from the CitiesIPCC conference. And what the goal of the conference was to create a research agenda for the IPCC and the special report that's going to be happening in the next cycle, but this will also be for the 6th assessment report. And I just wanted to say, these are in draft, they're only for discussion, but just because I know there are some researchers in the room, and then also for the stakeholders in the room, these are the things that, these were the topics that emerged. So we won't just want to, like, you know, help feed, and after, if there's any further one-on-ones, we can see if this seems to be the right set for you all.
Fantastic. So there might be a little bit of time afterwards if anyone wants to talk to Cynthia about those. Sorry, but we'll have to cut it off there. I'm afraid we're 4 minutes over time. But could you please all join with me in thanking Cynthia for a fantastic presentation?
Thank you.
And I'll just also quickly add thanks to the Melbourne Sustainable Society Institute for helping co-host this. If you're interested in coming along to any more of these events and you're on Twitter, a Twitter handle is there, and we also have a website, so please come along to the next few events. Thanks very much.
Okay.